I'm not on mute.
You got to keep on stepping, brother man. You got to keep on stepping. Keep on stepping, brother man. Keep on stepping, brother. Keep on stepping, brother man. Keep on stepping, brother. Keep on stepping, brother man. Keep on stepping, brother. Keep on stepping, brother man. Keep on stepping, brother. Gotta keep on stepping, brother man. Gotta keep on stepping, brother. Ain't got time for half step. Ain't got time for half step. Time marches on. Ain't got time for half step. Time marches on. Ain't got time for half step. Time marches on. Got to keep on stepping, brother man. Keep on stepping. Got to keep on stepping, brother. Got to keep on stepping. Got to keep on stepping, brother man. Got to keep on stepping. Take yours. Stay on, brother, stay on. Stay on, brother, stay on. Stay on, brother, stay on. Come on, brother. Got to keep on stepping. Keep on stepping, brother, man. Got to keep on stepping. Stay on, brother. Time marches on. Keep on stepping, brother, man. Keep on stepping. Keep on stepping, brother. Keep on stepping, brother. Ain't no time for half stepping. Time marches on. Time marches on. Ain't no half stepping. Come on.
Israel, Ian Roxborough-Smith, Telskut. My name is Ian Roxborough-Smith. I am one of the co-chairs of the Race and Anti-Racism Network here at UFE. UFE is situated on the lands of the Stalo peoples. The Stalo have an intrinsic relationship with what they refer to as Sol Temet, or our sacred land. Therefore, we express our deepest gratitude and profound respect for the honor of living and working on this land, virtually or otherwise. I would especially like us to acknowledge Sumas, Matsqui, and Kwantlen peoples here in Abbotsford before we begin this online panel. Welcome to Keep on Steppin, a panel on anti-racism hosted by UFV RAN.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sharn, and I'm also the co-chair of the Race and Anti-Racism Network at UFV. We'd like to begin by thanking UFV's Research, Engagement, and Graduate Studies and Associate Vice President, Dr. Gary Fair, for the generous sponsorship for today's event. We're also grateful to UFV's College of Arts, and in particular, Jennifer Brown, who has been so gracious in assisting us set up today's webinar. Thank you to UFV's Community Health and Social Innovation Hub, or CHASI, for their graphic design support in particular. But in particular, their amazing RA, UFV student Selena Coops, who designed the poster solely for today's event. The vibe we were all going for was a bit of badass, and I think Selena has done a pretty stellar job of upholding that energy. Thank you to our local community leaders, Black Connections and its members, Mark Forcier, for showing us the power of solidarity, and to our amazing campus radio, civil, and station manager, Aaron Levy, for your media support. Thank you to the RAN subcommittee team who helped organize this event, and other UFV community members and organizations for supporting anti-racism on campus and in the community. Ian and I would also like to take a moment to reflect on yesterday's white supremacist shooting in Atlanta of 8 women of Asian descent. This tragedy is not a shock, I'm saddened to say, but a stark reminder of the racism that percolates and festers all across Turtle Island, and how it intersects and is fortified through misogyny and class. We ask that you take some time to learn about Canada's own complicit role in anti-Asian racism, including when John A. Macdonald forged legislated practices of biological racism through his targeting of Chinese immigrants in the 19th century. These threads transcend space and time, and it's our responsibility to learn these histories to change the contemporary.
Today's Keep on Steppin panel is part of a tradition of events that UFV's Race and Anti-Racism Network, or RAN, has organized and hosted over the better part of the last 10+ years to commemorate the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which occurs on March 21st each year. This day is observed annually on the day the police in Sharpeville, South Africa, opened fire and killed 69 people at a peaceful demonstration against apartheid pass laws in 1960. This was 5 years after the Freedom Charter was created in 1955, which outlined what needed to be done to dismantle the system of racial apartheid that existed in that country. In 1979, the UN General Assembly adopted a program of activities to be undertaken during the second half of the decade for action to combat racism and racial discrimination. On that occasion, the General Assembly decided that a week of solidarity with the people struggling against racism and racial discrimination, beginning on the 21st of March, would be organized annually in all member countries. The title of this panel, Keep on Steppin', is meant to convey the urgency of continuing this fight for racial justice, but in our communities today. It implores us to continue the momentum that was reignited with the Black Lives Matter protests during the summer of 2020, when George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and countless others were murdered by racist police forces in the United States. It asks us to think about how we can dismantle systemic racism, white privilege, and white supremacy in all its forms, whether in our communities, where we work, or even in our homes. A 20th century US peace and civil rights leader named Jack Odell, who was an advisor and contemporary of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., retired to the Pacific Northwest in the 1990s. Mr. Odell came in recent years to speak with students here at UFV and across the Lower Mainland, and used to say to the many young people he mentored, including myself, to keep on steppin'. Keep on Steppin' certainly connects to the long legacy of Black music and resistance cultures that shaped what American music became, and arguably the freedom dreams that have so often been deferred like a raisin in the sun, as the poet Langston Hughes wrote in 1951. It harkens back to the 1940s and 1950s bebop age of hep cats and avant-garde jazz artists, but also sets up the age of funk and soul that became a soundtrack to demands for Black power now, and the activism of the US Black Panther Party for self-defense in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Keep on Steppin' was recorded by the Fatback Band in 1973 as one of the last hard-hitting funk albums of that era.
I can't believe I just did that. A sub-theme to the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is youth standing up against racism. And we believe this is a very apt theme. We have seen this emerge here at UFB, where students are taking their power, their rights into their own hands. They will continue to push and keep on stepping to challenge the institution, and RAN will always be there to support them. We hope that the discussion today, which comprises of a local musician, artist, a UFE alumni, poet and writer, and a prominent educator, that provide inspiring examples of how creative pursuits, like the improvisation that helped blues, jazz, soul, R&B, and funk, and later hip hop, push the boundaries of musical form and content, and can continue to help reinforce the here and now of where we need to go to keep on stepping towards an anti-racist future. We hope it motivates all of you, students, faculty, staff, and community alike, to continue to do the same. Today's conversation will consist of us asking each of our panelists 2 questions only, and for each of them to have a discussion amongst each other. The last 20 to 25 minutes of the webinar will be a chance for you to ask your questions to our panelists. So Ian and I will be monitoring the Q&A, and we encourage you to pose questions as each of the presenters are speaking, and we'll do our best to make sure we can answer all the questions. Our panelists for today include Mauvey. Born in Ghana, West Africa, and raised between the UK and Vancouver, Canada, artist and songwriter Mauvey filters his unique batch of alternative pop music with hip hop, R&B, soul, always alongside his message of love. Mauvey's message has always been love. Mauvey designed his projects to distribute love through the creative narratives of intentional songwriting, intelligent melody, and hypnotic beat. He has been influenced by artists like Michael Jackson, Kanye West, Mo Sangare, Prince, Childish Gambino, Labyrinth, NAO, The Weeknd, and Andre 3000. He is inspired by artists who made contributions so significant that they or their music will never be forgotten. Mauvey's home is here in the Fraser Valley, and I encourage Mauvey and Jasmine, you can put your videos on as we'll be beginning the conversation soon. Our next presenter is Jasmine Kaur. Jasmine is a writer, illustrator, and poet living on unceded Stolo territory. Her writing, which explores themes of feminism, womanhood, social justice, and love, acts as a means of healing and reclaiming identity. As a spoken word artist and creative writing facilitator, she's toured across North America, the UK, and Australia to connect with youth through the power of artistic expression. Named a rising star by Vogue magazine and a writer to watch by CBC Books, her work has been celebrated at the American Music Awards by musical icon Jennifer Lopez and shared by celebrities like Tessa Mae Thompson and Reese Witherspoon. She's been featured by Harper's Bazaar India, Huffington Post, the Indie 100, Elle India, Pop Sugar, and other publications. Our third panelist is Peggy Janicki. Peggy Janicki is Dakhel from, and I'm going to say this incorrectly, Peggy, so please do, when you introduce yourself, let me know how to say it properly. So Peggy Janicki is Dakhel from Nakastli, Wutin, and Luhutsmusiu, or the Beaver Clan. She is a teacher in the Mission School District and has taught a role drama history lesson for 18 years. Her experience has strengthened the work she has done as a BCTF facilitator, a BCTF PSA AEA member at large, and as the Aboriginal education contact for the Mission Teachers Union. Also, it's informed her knowing as she shared on UBC MOOC, Reconciliation Through Indigenous Education. She is a dipnet washerwoman, a fisherwoman, a Coast Salish war canoe puller, a Salish weaver in training. She is the weaver creator of the Soji 123 weaving project and honoring done in the Mission School District. She received the Innovative Practice Award from Indispire's Guiding the Journey Indigenous Educator Award in 2019 and co-received the Innovative Initiative Award from the Fraser Valley Cultural Diversity Awards in 2012. Lastly, she's a daughter, sister, auntie, mother, wife, and grandmother. Whew, this is impressive. Welcome, amazing panelists. So our first question to each of you is this. Can you tell us what activism means to you and how, where, or when you use it? So can you tell us what activism means to you and how, where, and when you use it? So Peggy, if I can start with you.
Sure. So Yalfwolf Kwasai, thank you so much for inviting myself and the others. And this question, sorry, and I will, as invited, correct you. So it's Nak Asli Woted, and we're Zamasu. So the Zamasu is a hard TES sound. I always say with our languages, we have the opportunity to decolonize our mouth, right?
Exactly.
To get those hard fricatives, the LH sounds, the la, those kinds of sounds are important. And I always take the opportunity where I can when it comes to languages to figure those sounds out, because I'm a language learner as well. So thank you for that. Well, I want to say thank you for inviting me. And this question, when it was first posed, it's one of those terms I don't really self-identify as an activist. It's kind of a loaded term. It's just something that we do. So by extension, my husband, Mr. Rick Joe, he is also a teacher. We graduated with our B.Ed out of UBC in 2001. We're NITAB grads. Also UFE, we started at it was UCFE at the time, and then moved over to UBC for the B.Ed portion of our degree. But I find in those times it is through universities, the university setting, the teacher setting is as Indigenous Indigenous teachers, we follow the Indigenous scholars that have put those footprints in front of us, right? So when people say, or again, I'm really humbled by being called an activist, but it's just, those are the footprints that are put in front of us. When I think of when I began canoe paddling, my daughter was 5, those teachings and that way of life was, for us to follow. I follow the canoes. Our family follows those Coast Salish war canoes. And the teaching is to keep going and to never give up. That's a really difficult thing to do now that we graduated 2001. So that's 20 years ago. And in that time, I'm not able to say that it was easy whatsoever. But our teachings are that we had to keep going. We have to keep going. And that's really key. And we're in our first week of our spring break. And I have to say, I've enjoyed sleeping in. And so it's that self-care in order to keep going, because we have these scholars, these Indigenous powerhouse scholars, Dr. Sandy Grandy, Dr. Joanne Archibald, Dr. Mary Ellen Turpel Lafond, these just Dr. Jan Hare, all of these powerhouse Indigenous scholars. And I feel that what I'm doing is just following, right? I'm just following their footsteps. I'm following my mother's footsteps. So Mary O'Connell or Sutherland Erickson, she moved down to Saltamuch territory like in the mid 60s and took up Salish weaving with her best friend, Josephine Kelly. And I follow her footsteps as well. She was One of the people I know in the newspaper articles, it says, that was Stalo people that were arrested in the 70s at Kokalitsa. But my mom was in there, and I think my sister, but they were, it was like, you need to not say your real name when you're arrested. It's like, oh, okay. That's the, I'm trying to take some notes. So I feel really humbled, to be invited here, and to be asked that question, and to say that, I don't feel like an activist. I'm just following the footsteps that I've put in front of me. So thank you.
Thank you, Peggy.
Yeah.
Jasmine, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I love that idea of not self-identifying as an activist, and it makes me think about what I've seen in the on social media recently with farmer protests specifically, and youth from the diaspora, from the Punjabi and Sikh diaspora, rising up in a very significant way on Instagram and Twitter and other social media, to speak up about the struggles that farmers in India are facing right now beneath the weight of anti-farming bills that are going to take away protections for marginalized farmers, and that base price of payment that they get for their crops. So in recent months, over the fall and now into the spring, we've seen Punjabi youth, a lot of Punjabi youth specifically, use their social media platforms as a form of activism to raise awareness about what's happening in their motherland. And I think about how amazing it is that, like, I see activists everywhere. And I would identify all those young people as activists, whether they're posting on their Instagram, or they're tweeting something, or they're making a TikTok to share their learning. It's exciting to me that this idea of activism is evolving, and it's becoming more inclusive. And it feels like something that all of us can engage in. And it's not so rigid in terms of like this idea that people may have had in the past, that activism only takes place in a certain area. It only takes place in person. It can't possibly take place on the internet. And I think, living in the era of COVID right now, when all of us are stuck at home, we don't really get to see anyone unless we're, very conscientiously coming outside, like masked up and at a certain distance. It's even more beautiful and amazing to me that people are persisting and using social media and using all of these different avenues to engage in activism in the capacity that is right for them. I often, when I was in my earlier 20s, I would often hear people debating about this concept of like, what is real activism? Does it only exist in person? Like, does online activism count? Does it really matter if you tweet something or post something or share something on social media? And I think that this year, especially, like very, very much so, proved to me that online activism is so important, and it's just as valid, if not more impactful than sometimes in-person events. I think about how, when we saw diasporic youth raising their voices about farmer protests in Punjab, that kind of swell of activism and awareness raising led to high profile public figures also learning about this kind of information. And we know that it had an impact because the Indian government, Modi's government, which is a right-wing fascist government, inarguably in my opinion, freaked out about it and countered it through social media. They countered people raising awareness about farmers through their own propaganda on Twitter, on other forms of social media, through celebrities who have been working in collaboration with the government. So it's like these power structures know that online activism has an effect on this world. And I think that when we are constantly like doubting ourselves and doubting the validity of our voice, I think that we, and I specifically, need to remember that this is the power of speaking up and raising awareness in whatever capacity we have accessible to us. And I also think that, like, we're living in a pandemic right now, but injustice is still very much taking place all around us at like a local level and at a global scale. Injustice doesn't sleep just because we're at home right now. So it's been really beautiful for me to witness people adapt to the times in order to persist, in order to be in community with one another. For example, we wouldn't be able to have a huge protest in the same way that we might have 2 years ago, but we still see people finding ways to be in community with one another in safe ways. We've seen car rallies, for example, pop up again and again in BC and other areas of the world where people are socially distanced, but still speaking to what is in their heart and speaking, truth to power. And that to me is just like a reminder that, we as human beings, like we will persist despite what is placed before us, despite the obstacles that are placed before us. It also makes me think about the fact that, right now in Delhi, in India, there are elderly farmers in the midst of a pandemic sitting together for months on end in peaceful protest, demanding that this fascist government listens to them. And I think about just how difficult that is in a pandemic when, lives are very much at stake, when we are like in close quarters with one another. But the fact being that in a very real and very honest way, injustice and state suppression and state violence could be just as dangerous to these elders as the pandemic and as an illness. So I've been listening, learning, absorbing a lot, and interestingly, we see activism all around us. We absorb it, we engage in it, but we don't always define it. It feels like something we do. It's an action. Interestingly, that also aligns with what the word activism quite literally tells us. But if I were to give you a definition and to put it into words, although this definition is going to evolve constantly throughout my life, I would say that activism is coming together, acting, quite literally acting in some capacity, whether that is through a digital interface or through our voices or through our bodies, to lift up the oppressed in community with one another.
Thank you, Jasmine. Mauvey.
Hi there, guys. Yeah, first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge a few people. First of all, Mark Forcier from Black Connections. Thank you so much for everything you do for me and other Black people in the community. It's truly amazing, honestly. And Aaron Levy from Civil Radio, who I've kind of got in touch with recently, in recent months, and he's been very supportive to me and over the years to hundreds, if not thousands, of independent artists, just essentially existing to give them a voice and an opportunity and a platform. So thank you so much for that. Thank you to UFE, to Ian and Sean. Conversations have been great, and to Jen, and finally but not least, to my fellow panelists, Peggy and Jasmine. I'm actually mildly overwhelmed to be in your on the same panel as you. It's an amazing privilege and honor. So thank you very much for having me. I think I'd like to say that I guess my definition of activism is just that the key word is active. Like I mentioned before, I think it's extremely important. That I think that's the crux of activism, is to really be active in pursuit, in a fight for something that you believe strongly about. I think that there's a couple of things I really wanted to talk about with regards to activism and how it's shifted in modern times, where even if there wasn't a pandemic, there would be a large part of activism done online, because that's the platform that the majority of the world communicate through. So, and whether it's groups, individual private groups on like WhatsApp or, messaging or Facebook, to larger groups, to whole platforms on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and whatever. And it opens up a whole new world of intention, and I guess it makes it easier for the passive activist, which I don't discount their efforts. I would always suggest that people do more like groundwork and learn more than just kind of following trends. But the power of following trends too is quite evident in when a large number of people get behind something. Maybe every single individual in that that's getting behind in that fight doesn't know 100% of what's going on, and sometimes that can be problematic. But a lot can be accomplished from a huge number of people banding behind something, which I think is amazing. And I think it's one of the things that have been really important, especially with a pandemic, is looking after each other. So, for example, it's not just about getting out on the streets, holding signs, and fighting for something, or doing it online. It's actually, behind every activist is a human being. So one thing that I've tried to do with myself, and I would encourage others to do, is to check in on your fellow activists, check in on your brother or your sister, or your friend, because those who are engaging in real activism, it's constant. It's something that they're most likely living through, hence why they're so passionate about it. So it's really, really nice to actually communicate with each other, in a really, sometimes in a really simple way, like, how are you doing? And having those private conversations, or whether it's one-on-one or small groups, can be just as fulfilling as going out and fighting, because it's in those spaces where you'll often find the most safety. You'll often find the camaraderie and the type of feedback that you need, and maybe that there's areas in which you need to improve, and you're not going to get those types of constructive criticisms or development tips from those against you, for example. So I think it's really important to fill the tank, as it were, to fill the tank of your fellow activists. But essentially, I just want to circle back to this key word of being active, and that's what it is like. This entire thing, keep on stepping. It always brings me back to something my mum would tell myself and my sisters, and that is, it's such a simple thing, but no one, if you keep putting, it's impossible to stay still. It's impossible to not move forward and to not grow. And I've always taken that actually literally. So imagine standing in the same place, physically just not moving. You're not going to go anywhere. You're not going to grow. You're not going to develop. But even if you take one step in front of the other, you're moving forward in some way. And that's my heart behind activism, is to keep moving forward. And I'll talk about this possibly in an upcoming question of how I'm being active in my own way, and explain a bit more about that. But yeah, I guess that's my answer for that.
Thank you, Mauvey. A question that I had that perhaps all three can discuss as each of you were talking was this idea of active. You know, what I found in our conversations with RAN and with all our colleagues who identify as Indigenous or Black or people of color and you know, of various backgrounds, is that the active part is inherent in us, right? Because I give this analogy of the light bulb, right? Like we have a light bulb switch that is constantly on and attuned to the work of decolonizing or colonization or systemic racism or racism in our, it's just on. We go to sleep, it's on. That work is constantly there. So for so many of, let's say, activism, activists, that that never goes off. And that drives the work in many different ways of the ways that Peggy talked about and Jasmine and you, Mauvey, about the activism. So how do you make sense, and I'm struggling with this, of the performative activism? My sense from what each three of you are saying is that at the end of the day, those steps are going to be taken because there's almost like a mass kind of movement of we're talking about anti-racism. So the mass movement's taking place, so people are going to have to follow along. But how do we make sense of the performances, and does that not do more harm? How do you, make sense of that? And this is a conversation for all three to just talk.
Yeah, if I may, I think it's like, again, I think it all starts with people. You know, at the end of the day, there's people. We are people behind this word activism, or the act of, or the personification of an activist, where we are human beings, and so human beings, they only, that light switch that is constantly on, that you mentioned, it can only be effectively on for so long. It's impossible if it isn't filled in some way. Tanks do empty. It's just a fact. So it's important that we take care of ourselves, and what I mean by it, as in each other. So we check in with each other, fill each other's tanks, uplift each other. Those things can help for example, a battery last longer if you're if you're filling it. A car run longer if you're putting gas in it. Like it's important to be able to fill each other up. And also, one of the things, like personally, it's very destructive for me to just be to dwell in what I don't like. So it's so hard to, like, you get things every day. Every day you see a story, or you hear something, or someone does something to you personally, and it's like, it takes you, I've got a really good memory. Well, I'd like to think so. So I remember, it's quite bad. I remember almost every single little thing that happened, like my whole life. It's and so when something happens, it reminds you of everything that has ever happened, and so it's 2020 that I personally made like a decision late in the game for sure, but that I made a decision, like, I'm going to do something that is larger and more impactful than thinking about the things that I don't like, and then that being what drives my activism. I don't like this, so I'm going to shout about it, or this is wrong, so I'm going to defend it. It's right to do those things, but I wanted to go a step further and have my activism have the fuel for it be coming from a different place, which actually gives me different energy. So, for example, I always use the analogy of when a math teacher tells you that you're going to suck in life. Just as an act. No one did that to me, but I'm just saying, imagine that happens. I'm sorry, math teachers out there, like, I'm just using you as an example. And you use that as fuel, that negativity as fuel to become great in your life. And like, imagine if that energy was positive. Imagine if it was, my dad always believed in me, so I always tried hard, right? So like, and I think that when the fuel is coming from something positive or greater than yourself, it it increases the capacity of your tank. And that's kind of would be what I'd start with.
Yeah, I can jump in. I love that conversation around the source of what's propelling you forward, because I 100% agree. I think that guilt and shame can propel people forward in activism, but love is going to sustain you. Guilt and shame are only going to work for so long until that fuel runs out, and then you're depleted, and that's where you might see what we would call performative activism, however we want to measure that, or however people might perceive that in someone else. But just thinking back to like what I've been seeing recently on social media with like farmer protests, I think about how, for whatever reason, and I can theorize about why it would be, but I often see young people, young activists, leaning into shame and guilt towards themselves and towards others as a means to continue a protest. And yeah, like on one side, maybe on those short term that might be effective and that might motivate your friend to go and post something. But then you have to ask yourself, in the long term, and has that motivated that person to sit there and read theory and critically analyze themselves and learn and grow and do that hard work that requires you to like sit there and like go within yourself and search. And I think that's where not just like the superficial concept of love, but like deep rooted and true and authentic love for community and for your people and for marginalized people everywhere needs to be cultivated. And it takes time. It doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It takes patience, and it takes being in community with one another in positive ways. And I also think about how we engage with one another, even within activist spaces, even within community spaces. Because like I said, just a minute ago, guilt might be effective in the long term, 100%. We've seen those results, but is that how we want to be in community with one another? Like, is that how we want to engage with folks who are fighting with us within our own communities? And in terms of like this concept of like performative activism, kind of like what you said, like I feel more drawn to learning and growing and building with folks in my community than sitting down and deciding who's fake and who's real and who really is here for the cause, based on like what they posted and how they posted and the content of their post, because we tend to like dissect everyone else. And that's energy. Energy comes in like limited quantities, and we all have a certain amount of energy within ourselves for a day or a week or a year. And I question, like, where do I want to spend my energy? And do I want to spend that energy deciding the authenticity of somebody else's love for the movement? Or do I want to sit there learning and growing and doing what I can with like youth and with people who are around me and the other activists who I trust and want to grow and build with? So I don't know, I've heard this term like performative activism before, but I don't know how constructive it is for me to be the one pulling it apart in everyone else.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump off of the previous speakers and just kind of share my thoughts and feelings on it. And I think a couple of things. So certainly listening to the previous speakers, I think from the Indigenous perspective, the shame and violence piece was legislated into our lives through the Indian Act, through Indian residential school, through the healthcare system, through the legal system, through the education system. So here we have this imposed, very colonial, very patriarchal systems in contrary or in opposition to our matriarchal ways and our sovereign matriarchal ways is kind of a piece. When I listen to, I like to go to talks like this. I'm usually not in them. So the last one I was able to listen to is Dr. Leilani Sabzalian. She's the recent author of Indigenous Children's Survivance in Public Schools. And I quite loved her idea around zones of sovereignty, right? We have these zones of sovereignty and and that to me is that really regenerative and generative space. So to have that loving ethic, sorry, I've forgotten the scholar's name, Black scholar. No, it'll come to me later on today. But she talks about this loving ethic. And I believe, you know, just to carry on Jasmine's idea, is these moments of love, these moments of creativity, and by extension, these moments of sovereignty, or, you know, that come for Indigenous people, is sort of where we need to remain. Because I agree, you know, if I spend my energy pointing my finger at certain people in the community, you know, I lose that anger, because I'm no longer centering on a loving ethic. I'm not centering on some of the teachings that have been extended to me. And how many hours of my life would I lose in that? I just wanted to extend the thinking to creativity, is to not, you know, we're all asked if we can be activists. And I think one of my key pieces that I bring is to not to stand in the way of the vision or the creativity that comes, right? So two, you know, projects off the top of my head is the Soji 123 Swakwith, the weaving. The idea, it was already in my weaving, my art book, right? So as a weaver, I'm often creating designs, and it was already there. And where did it come from? It just came out of my creativity. And who am I to stand in the way of this creativity? And the second project, and this is my connection to UFV, and I see Vandy is here, is this idea that I have permission to share the story of the secret pocket. And this is a secret pocket that my mother, attending Indian residential school, Lejac in Fraser Lake specifically, is the girls, they invented these secret pockets that they would sew inside their petticoats. And in those petticoats, they were able to smuggle food to feed themselves and to feed the smaller children or smaller girls in the Indian residential school. But to me, like I prepped, I think I was teaching Vandy, I think it was 3 sets of students. So, you know, 100 students. And I prepped for the first time, like little tiny felt, because, you know, all teachers, you may or may not know, teachers have a lot of prep. And so I remember making this prep, and I was cutting little felt, like, I don't know, 2 inch by 2 inch, with a little safety pin on them. And I was like, I want the future teachers to wear this pin and to have this conversation about Indian residential schools in their own spaces after this workshop. I want the conversation to carry on. And it was just an idea that I had. And who am I to interrupt in that idea or that vision? Because the vision is around, I would say, restoring or restructuring the story of Canada to ourselves. You know, I'm very, very much interested in redress, restoring Indigenous stories, you know, revealing the moments of resistance, you know, because we're trying, this is my way to interrupt, as what Dr. Susan Dion puts out under the perfect stranger idea, is this is my personal way to interrupt that narrative, to interrupt the perfect stranger. This is how we become in good relations, is to know who's in your community, right? Who is here, you know, who's, I'm coming to you from Chiacto First Nation. So what does Chiacto First Nation mean to me? It's in my acknowledgement, you know, but are they perfect strangers? And why are they perfect strangers if they are, right? So how do we become in good relations? Well, first of all is awareness, right? Interrupting that narrative of the perfect stranger, holding true to your vision or that creativity. Because I think Dr. Beverly Tatum Am I saying that right? She wrote the book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? It's an older book, but she shares at the end of her book is a dream she had. And in her dream, part of it was in the dream there, she started in her car, she started going on this really rough terrain, this gravel road, and, you know, reflecting on how hard it is and why is this? But I really remember I put a lot of value in dreams, and I really remember this vision she had in the dream, because she was like, why is it so hard? And she said the voice in her dream responded and said, because this road's never been built before, right? We've never seen this before. We haven't seen, you know, a colonial, we haven't seen anti-colonialism. We haven't seen the anti-racism. You know, we haven't seen these spaces of policy that's being redressed right now, right? This is Canada's 152 years old, you know, so we haven't seen it. So of course, you know, it reflects the struggle that we each have, and that we don't interrupt that creative flow that's found within loving ethic for self and for others. Sorry, that was really long, long part
I
to,
love your,
to
no,
two parts.
I love the long answers.
Sorry, my
Beautiful.
apologies. So I was just kind of reflecting on what Jasmine and Mauvey were saying, and I was just like, you know, I'm just trying to sit here really quietly, but I was like, yeah, I totally get what they're saying. And I love, you know, the intersectionality, and I love, you know, that, you know, each and every one of you are bringing me energy to carry on, even in this moment. So my hands go up to the other panelists and to the folks. So I'll
Thank
stop
you,
now. So.
Thanks, Peggy.
Yeah.
I think Ian has the second question, and then after we can go on into, there's about 6 questions so far from the attendees, which is great, but we'll start off with our second question.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for this wonderful conversation. And it's just really powerful, and I'm really learning a lot here. I'm taking a lot of notes. But I just, you know, a lot of you have reflected on, you know, the energies involved and the emotions needed to keep active, to keep, you know, moving forward, and just sort of thinking about the last year, you know, living under COVID and the life that we lead under that, and just wondering how you all feel about the mass display of activism since the Black Lives Matter resurgence, you know, arguably shifted the needle on anti-racism work from last summer. You know, in what ways have you seen things change? What ways have you seen things, you know, remain the same, or maybe even get worse in some cases? You know, how can the momentum of activism be maintained specific to the places you each work or navigate in and through? You know, there were a lot of folks who got involved in the protest last summer, for example, and this was something very new for them, right? And you know, the momentum from that time maybe has been somewhat lost. So just wondering if you would be each willing to share a bit about, you know, just reflecting on the last year.
I'll go ahead because I have a short answer.
Okay.
So the Black Lives Matter that happened here in Chilliwack was very student generated, and I believe she was in grade 12. I apologize. That person's name is not coming to mind, but I did not attend because it was early in COVID and I was just experiencing like health symptoms, you know, so in an abundance of caution, I didn't attend. And the answer is our youth, right? The answer is intergenerational. Our answer is when in the years of working with the Indigenous Youth Leadership Conference, you know, we would hold that in November. And there are some key people that we would organize with the CIIS regional committee. So this is a regional committee. It's called Friends Working Together in Halkomelem. And it would, in this conference though, is our opportunity to connect with Indigenous youth. And each and every time, they would just regenerate me. Like when I was first talking about sovereignty, the first time when I, as an adult, an adult teacher, coming across this term to decolonize, I still remember like holding up my hand. I was like, okay, hands up, because I was often facilitating up on stage with some really amazing Indigenous youth that we would train ahead of time. And I would be putting up my hand and be like, hi, who's heard of decolonization? And probably like all of them put up their hands, right? So this is like 200 youth. And I'd be like, oh, sweet. I got nothing else to say because I was going to do a lesson on decolonization. It was, so they just blew me away, and the youth that are coming up are just so amazing and so, I don't know what other word, like just beautiful in spirit, beautiful in word. And we just need to encourage and to extend the teaching of to keep carrying on. And it's in our youth. Like and now as a grandmother, I get to call many people youth now. So it's kind of I guess a generational it's part of my job as being a grandma is to say to a lot of the youth, it's there, it just has to keep going. So I know the momentum, and that's not to say racism, like I could walk out, and that was always my challenge as a BCTF facilitator or as a teacher even, is I could, after having this amazing talk, even now, once I'm done, it's like, oh, I have to go to the grocery store. It's like within an hour, I could have some really blatant racist things said to me. And I think our allies or people, white people, they don't really realize the unpacking Dr. Peggy McIntosh's ideas around invisible white privilege is they don't realize our day-to-day struggle to get to these talks, right? They don't understand or have a hard time kind of not, I think we're interrupting that, what's that Lego movie song? Everything is awesome. It's like, everything is awesome. It's like, okay, I'm going to do the Indigenous and add everything is not awesome. That kind of piece of it is another interesting thing around, the blatant racism that we run into is always a challenge. But I would say the answer is in our youth, and it's just a thing to behold. And if we can just keep going with that within the COVID-19 context. So again, what Jasmine was saying is that online presence, I think is really important, is important to boost when and we're able. So, lahoi, I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy. Maybe if Jasmine, you could continue to answer that question too.
Yeah, thinking specifically about what I've seen within South Asian communities, as Black Lives Matter protests have grown, especially in the past year, I've seen both good and bad. I've seen growth and also stagnancy and sometimes moving backwards. I would say like on a near constant basis or near like daily basis, like I witness anti-Blackness all around me. And I'm speaking more specifically to anti-Blackness within South Asian communities, because that's what I witnessed firsthand at a close distance. And I think about how amazing it is that I've seen so many, Punjabi and Sikh youth and South Asian youth engage meaningfully with learning about their complicity in anti-Blackness, and learning about how they need to do better and how we need to do better. But simultaneously, I see this almost like resentment sometimes within South Asian communities, within non-Black POC communities in general, where, you know, we vividly and viscerally understand our own liberation movements, but for some reason, anger, which should be directed at white supremacy, ends up getting directed at Black organizers and Black activists and Black movements. So for example, I, you know, will hop onto Twitter one day and see people talking about farmers' protests in Punjab, but then run into a comment that says, why do y'all care about BLM but don't care about your own community? And it comes back to the guilt, and it comes back to the anti-Blackness and the fact that, you know, for a lot of people of color, for a lot of non-Black people of color, the only time that they're really thinking hard about anti-Blackness is when it's in relativity to their own oppression. And that's not thinking about it at all. That's really just staying very, very perfectly rooted in the anti-Blackness that's been instilled within you. So I see good things happening. I see people learning and growing, but I worry about those huge like missing puzzle pieces. And I worry about that space for growth and what I feel is like in some pockets, like a growing distance from where we should be in terms of having solidarity with other marginalized communities. Because I tend to see people not realizing how critical all of our liberations are to one another's. You know, all of us are liberated when, you know, each of us are liberated as communities when all of us are liberated together. We rise in community with one another. And it's a little scary for me to not see people recognizing the power of unity in the face of white supremacy.
Thank you. Thank you. Super well said. The unity brings really, really clearly. Mauvey, if you might like to have the last word on this question.
Yeah, absolutely. Jasmine, that was phenomenal. Honestly, you kind of more than hit the nail on the head there. I think that so I've been, I guess, really lucky to like I was born in Ghana. I moved to and grew up in the UK, and because of sports, I was able to travel to and live in the United States. In the South, I lived in Kentucky. I lived in Midwest, I guess. I lived in here in Canada. I've lived in Australia, and I've lived around Europe in like Scandinavia and other countries in Europe. So, like, my perspective, and I say all of that because one of the biggest things that I'm kind of seeing is like the blame scenario, you know. So everybody who's outside of America, they can't possibly believe that the energy going into oppression of any race exists in their countries. Like it can't possibly be here in Australia. It can't possibly be here in Canada. It can't possibly be in England. Oh my gosh! Like it can never, you know, these, and it's I'm not the authority on the most racist countries in the world, but having lived in like most white countries in the world, like it's in my experience, they're exactly the same. Like it's the exact same everywhere, and so to discount I guess the experiences and the struggle of groups in different countries because we feel like America is worse is ridiculous. I think because of the where there is, and this is I don't want to say good or bad, the more activism that I'm seeing, so the more people that are standing up, what I've actually seen is a larger amount of people who feel more entitled to actually convey their opposition of that, and it's executed with more bravery, with more freedom, that their like hate and racism, these things are actually communicated with a larger sense of, well, if you can say that it's wrong, then I can also have my side, and that's obviously incredibly dangerous. But that's actually truthfully what I've seen. I've experienced racism my whole life, but in 2020, like, you know, right before, you know, like when we were allowed to kind of go on like hour walks in England, you know, in a pandemic, at least 8 times, so I'm just remembering exactly 8 times at this point, someone yelled incredibly crazy words from their car to me as I'm walking down the road. And I'm thinking like, is this like 1950? Like what? We're like in 2020, and this is post George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, the whole world going crazy. This is post that. And so so I guess the kind of, to tie it in, the more activism, I feel like it's supposed to be less, I guess, but the more activism, the more opposition, you know, and the internet feeds that. The internet is a place where we were talking about this the other day in our when we met, at the anonymity of people being able, like it's a place that sparks the worst people in the world. In my opinion, I guess they might think that they're not the worst people in the world, but it gives them a platform to actually be able to cultivate, foster, develop hate, essentially. So that's what I'm saying. You know, there's the light that has been shed globally is enormous, and you know, the work though is, in my opinion, hasn't even begun. It's all that's happened, in my opinion, is the exposition of things. So like things being exposed, like that's all I've actually seen, which is good. It's a great start. I mean, it's a start to uncover, expose, and to have conversations, you know, like this. I think it's phenomenal. And then I'm seeing a lot of fatigue as well. It's like, you know, I think everybody here has mentioned now that it's not something you turn off. You don't turn off being Black, being South Asian, being Indigenous, you know, being a person of color. That doesn't turn itself off. So it's because of the hyper spotlight that is on it now. It becomes tough to stay on all the time. But I do encourage people to try and stay on as much as possible, because some of the people who are to ask questions, or they might genuinely be ignorant of something, and so they really might just need kind of a calm head to educate them. And if your tank is completely empty, or if you're done that day, it's not your fault, but you could create a bigger animal, you know, you have someone who's innocent, who's said something weird, you snap at them, and then they're back into their shell. And maybe they might not say anything to you, but now you've almost started to foster something completely different. Someone who doesn't, you know, that they don't trust that they can be open, or whatever it is. So it's such a tough game for a person of color, because it's like, you know, you're expected to be on all the time. And then the second you're not, maybe the person that you encounter might actually just genuinely need that from you. They might need you to be on that day, but then it's like, it's not your job to be on, and blah, 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 all of that sort of stuff. So it's tough. It's really, really difficult. And that's why I'm going to go back to this all the time. That's why it's really important to look after each other. It's really important to acknowledge your mental health and mental health struggles. It's really important to be coming from a place of love, because love lasts longer than anything else, any other emotion that you would have behind anything. So I think that's going to be my answer to everything. It's always coming back to love, because practically, not even like ideally, but practically, it's the thing that actually works. So yeah, and as a person, I'm sure it's just been communicating with everybody on this panel. We all have heavy consciences. I can tell that from how yeah, everyone's beautiful here, and so I'm sure we acknowledge the guilt of white people as well. So I could go, there's days where I'm just like, oh, I just don't even know what to do or say. And then I'm thinking like, man, like most of the people that I know are white and they've only been nice to me. And I don't hate them. You know, it's so hard to, because there's some of the best human beings in the world who maybe do acknowledge their, like people like Ian, like you do acknowledge your privilege, do like, you know, and then I think about the guilt that you are going through on a daily basis. I actually think about that every day. I'm like, man, like, what about just you know, they can't even call themselves ignorant. They are switched on. They want to get better. They acknowledge their privilege, all of these things. You know, how can I actually continue to support them? Because in this whole thing of ending racism, like my dad always told me that like the oppressed are never going to end the thing that they're being oppressed for. So like men alone aren't going to end sexism, or women alone aren't going to end sexism against women. Black people not going to end racism by themselves. It's just not. It is impossible to do that by that people group themselves. You need allies and collaborators and help from members of the community that is oppressing. Like that's what I believe. Maybe you guys don't agree, but I really believe that that's really the only way. You know, allies like Ian and other people I'm sure in our lives that are there. So again, it's important to, I mean, they don't need pats on the back or anything like that, but it is important to just, I guess, acknowledge that there are some people that are that are for the destruction of racism. And like my last point to Jasmine's point is looking inward, at people of color. So for me, my experience is Black people. So you mentioned, you know, with Asian communities and they're kind of anti-Black. That exists in Black culture among Black people. So it's incredible that exists within Black people, you know. So how are we even going to begin to kind of come to this place of change when you know, some of these issues are happening, you know, within.
Mauvey,
I've gone on. Yeah.
If I can just step in, because what you're talking about is actually a great segue into the first question. Yeah. But what I loved about everything you just answered and the complexity of how you're teasing out everything in your head is how so many people of color question their daily lived interactions with people in our communities around questions of race. Like you've just talked about, having an off day, potentially, snapping at somebody for saying something racist, but then feeling guilty that maybe that's going to create something else. And then feeling like you're talking about white guilt. You've addressed so many questions that we constantly have to traverse. Like we are constantly in this space questioning, did we do something wrong? Have we hurt somebody? Is there guilt? Are we like, so that was a really powerful answer though, because that complexity plays in so many people's heads. So I appreciate the way you kind of talked that out. I think it's very important, even though there is conflicting answers in the way you talked, or even though there is different answers you've just given, but that's the nature of this work. So I really appreciate that answer. But your comment about allies is actually the first question we received. So I thought maybe we could start off with that. And then we may not be able to get to all the questions, but I'll try to pick out the ones. Ian and I can take turns asking the question. So the first question we have is around allies. So what do you need from people who want to be allies or accomplices to further your work and protect you and your community or communities? What do we need from allies?
I'm really sorry, I'm gonna go. First of all, I feel like it's important to not call it your work. And I'm not coming at you in any negative way, but it's not our work. It's the work. Like we're a human race. It's all of us. So and I'm sure. Actually, I'm not sure. I don't know if you meant it in any particular way, but that's what I would say. It's really important to just to acknowledge that it's human work.
Yeah.
So it's all of us.
Thanks, Mauvey.
I'll just jump in. This is an often heard phrase or question within Indigenous communities, Indigenous kind of spaces or equity-seeking spaces. Is there's a couple of things. So one of them is to be aware, of some of the definitions about what is an ally. And one of the key features, so of course there's a couple of documents I'm thinking of course, is Dr. Lynn Gale, the Ally Bill of Responsibilities. There's another document I quite love as well. It's Indigenous Ally Toolkit. It's the Montreal Indigenous Community Network. It's a beautiful pamphlet. And the Indigenous people I would show, there's a couple of key things. And of course, the book Unsettling the Settler Within, Indian Residential Schools, Truth-Telling and Reconciliation. Sorry, I just, Regan, Paulette. Sorry, she was a speaker at one of our conferences a few years back. And so one of the things that would often come up for allyship, one of them is you're not able to self-identify as an ally, right? It's people within the community that would call you an ally, and to not speak in front of us. So there's, I'm just thinking of a particular project, and they decided to put their voice first. This is what I want. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to organize, with little to no opportunity for Indigenous voice or direction. We're invited to serve appetizers and to open the door. So I don't, that was a bit problematic at the moment. And it was interesting conversation, but it points to one of the features in the Indigenous Ally Toolkit is the idea of ego. The idea of ego, and it comes up in many ways, and it comes up for myself. We all have an ego. We would love to say what a beautiful job we're doing, or and everybody is like that. But I think that's I would really caution against, do I want this Do I sincerely want this for an Indigenous allyship within Fraser Valley really talks to sovereignty, which is very much around, the hashtag land back piece, right? And, what does that mean? What does that mean? If I can't give the land back, then what can I do? Right? We're on stolen lands. That's what unceded means. It is kind of a nice, a cautious way. And so the action pieces are really important. And this is where I follow the scholars that have gone in front of me. And so Dr. Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond has some key features of her report of the racism in the healthcare system. Dr. Cindy Blackstock has a whole, somebody already swore on here and I feel like I'm swearing, it's not swearing, has a whole freaking website on what to do. So, and Dr. Cindy Blackstock, I think for the anniversary or the 150 birthday of Canada, she put out like a tweet every day for 150 years on what you can do for reconciliation. Right? She has at this moment an opportunity for everybody to write a postcard, to write a letter and say that Canada needs to stop its racism against First Nations children, right? With her website, the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. I was heartbroken. Because I was so excited. So Canada, you may or may not know, has lost at its own human rights tribunal. And I followed that case very closely because I really thought as a teacher, wow, this is a great opportunity. Canada's finally going to know it's racist, in policy and literally, like blatantly and systemically. And what I came out of that, that talk, she would go around and do talks, and she's been at some key conferences for BCTF and for others. And she's on with many other scholars. She's on the news. She wins so many awards. And she's fighting for First Nations children, for Canada. And what does Canada do? It fights. It's in this very moment is paying millions of dollars to lawyers to fight against First Nations children and against these policies. There's other pieces, the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls report around how can we interrupt these colonial and patriarchal policies. It's a whole report. They've done an executive summary. The executive summary is succinct, and it means to be in relation, what Jasmine was talking about. And of course, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has stalled and needs to continue in all of our spaces. And lastly, and this is, millions and millions of dollars spent on the Royal Commission of Indigenous Peoples in 1996. These are key things that everyone can know about for themselves. Everybody needs to have this transformative feeling within themselves. But there are some very obvious things that we could do walking away today. Like, I invite everybody to go onto the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. And I think there's even like a form, a PDF form. You could just print it off. And it's, write a postcard to the Prime Minister. She has everything there. It's also a very wonderful academic journal. It's a portal, things like hashtag I am witness. There is bring a teddy bear to lunch. and to use social media in these ways. She has certain hashtags to take over, and that was one of the things, in COVID-19, that was something my husband and I did with our family, is we came together, we made a pot of tea, and we're sipping tea, and we're actually like making lots of jokes about sipping tea because we're sipping tea. and you know, but we're posting this out onto social media because we want the truth. We're seeking the truth and we're looking for action. It's ethical imperative. It's a moral imperative, and these are things that can be done today. You know, and follow Dr. Cindy Blackstock. She is, you know, and I'm just sort of a conduit. I'm not, you know, I didn't invent this. I didn't start my own website. I didn't start my own journal. I'm simply following the footsteps of the folks that have gone before me, and to know that racism needs to be done, needs to be undone today. And there's a way you can begin, and who knows which road you're going to travel upon alongside people of color, Indigenous people, because it's just so needed. It's so needed. It's so today. And just to follow, I think Mauvey had said it, is, you know, we're doing these movements, we're doing them not just for like our own sovereignty, for our own livelihood, for our futurities. We're doing it for everyone, right? The colonial project, the imperialism, the add and stir method that Dr. Maria Batiste talks about for education. You know, this is for all of us. You know, we're, the colonial project doesn't work for people. And I love what Mauvey said. It's, you know, it's not my project, it's all of ours, you know? And so these are those moments where it's important for everybody. This is, you know, do we want equity? Do we want, you know, and you know, I am able-bodied. That's my privilege. I'm able-bodied and I can have access. You know, I'm not deaf. I'm not blind. I have, you know, this privilege, and I want to make space for folks, right? Why, you know, equity and inclusion is important. It's important for everybody. So, sorry, I'll get off my small soapbox. Sorry, I'm getting all like really passionate because, you know, just really enjoying what Mauvey's saying, what Jasmine is saying. And that's kind of my, you know, just to round it out is, you know, to be aware and to put your ego in check, because it's not, and that's hard. So I'm, you know, I'm saying it, you know, the words are coming out my mouth, but it's actually really, really hard. It's hard because, you know, you want to, I don't know, ego is really tricky. It's so tricky. It's, you know, for everybody. So definitely ego and definitely education.
Ian, are you going to ask the next question?
Sure. This is a question from Shannon, audience. Thank you, panelists, for your words. When it comes to anti-racism work, I sometimes feel racially burnt out and hopeless. How do you care for yourself in regards to anti-racism specifically? How do you relight that fire to keep going? Are there certain actions or people you look to reignite the will to continue? Thanks, Shannon.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that. I think I often hear white people specifically ask that question, and I think that we need to kind of pull apart what that burnout actually is. Like, is the burnout seeing injustice and violence close up and feeling destroyed by it? Is the burnout confronting where you have work to do and feeling tired because, you know, like Peggy described, your ego is getting in the way, and making it hard to listen to the truth of what work you need to do? So I think first analyzing within yourself and digging deep below the surface to figure out what's going on within yourself, and then thinking of strategies to continue the work. So for example, like I think about how on social media we can see, you know, post after post after post about a certain topic, and you know, you're scrolling for 3 hours straight and suddenly you're not really reading what you're scrolling through and tapping through and swiping through. And when I get into that space personally, when I can't scroll anymore, I put down my phone and I open up a book. I think about different strategies to unplug from my phone. If the phone itself is the source of burnout, I can still continue to do work. I can still continue to learn, better myself, and be an ally. It just means that I'm doing that work in a different capacity now. And I think that to the point is like what it is for me. I think it's not a matter of putting aside the work and pretending that you know it's not a problem right now. It's rethinking your approach to self-care and solidarity in the process.
Yeah, I think that was brilliant. For me, I think, yeah, again, like differentiating the source of the burnout, and specifically to mental health, and that to me that plays a significant role in it, and again, I'm going to say it again. I think it's important to look after each other. I think it's really difficult to do it yourself. So when people say like, you know, I just need to look after my own mental health, like for real people, like, and I'm just talking about people that I know. So I just don't know what it looks like to just look after it yourself. Like, how can you be in an incredibly vulnerable position mental health wise, and then just look after it yourself? Like, it's very difficult. So and maybe if it's very bad, obviously getting some help is important, but a lot of things can be helped with community, and can be helped with communication, and actually just can be helped with telling someone that, hey, do you know what, this is kind of hard for me. Like, there's a musician that I speak to. I have a thing personally that I do. I do a weekly chat. I do a weekly chat with like 20 people, right? So some of them are half hour, some of them are 15 minutes, some of them are an hour, right? I do actually do other things other than talk to people, but it's important for me, because after those conversations, and those conversations aren't all about me. It's not like, hey guys, this is how I'm feeling. Maybe it's a conversation that is about like they need to speak for a whole hour, and I just listen. But after those conversations, I'm just like, oh, batteries recharged. Like, even if it's not about me. So I think having those conversations are really, really important, because yeah, I think I just place such a high value on what we can be for each other. It fascinates me what help we can give to each other by just listening, talking, and having it. You know, imagine if you, like, I've had it in my life where I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody. So I was in boarding school. I wanted to make my parents proud. So if there was any issues going wrong, I didn't want to tell my parents. Can't tell anybody at school. So then you're holding everything in, and then that just makes the spiral worse. And then even if there's one person that you can kind of offload to, that makes things a lot easier. Sometimes the situations can be a bit more serious, and you might need professional help, and that's what the professional help is there for. But a lot of things can just be with communicating when it gets to feeling burnt out. And then the other thing that I think is really interesting that Jasmine touched on is, I'm just going to be honest, like, I think some people just need to get over themselves, like, so that's just like really honest, because if like
Mauvey, I think you cut off. Can you repeat that? It sounded like it was like when you said, I'm just going to be honest, and it was like, boom, you cut off right there. And I was like, what's he saying?
I just said, it was the universe shutting me off. No, I was saying that some people need to get over themselves. That's what I was saying. I think, you know, in the first week, I guess like the George Floyd murder happened. This is a real true story. George Floyd murder happened. Less than a week, I had a white person, and it actually someone who I've known for 20 years was like, you know, I just can't do it anymore. You know, it's you know, I can't feel bad. You know, I can't feel bad for the rest of my life. You know, I've got a family and kids, and I, you know, so like I kind of need to like switch off from everything. I'm like, he's literally been dead less than a week, and like honestly, like not really that much has happened, and you don't even really go on social media that much, like, and you're telling this to a Black person. Like, that's what I found the most egregious, I guess. To me, that was just like, it's very easy for people to be like, oh, you know, I'm so burnt out. Like, you know, I'm tired of feeling guilty. Like, in those moments, if I'd say for white people, in those moments, I would just really try to, at some point, be like, you know, kind of put yourself in the steps of someone who has to go through something every day of their lives. And for you to kind of acknowledge it, even if it's once a day, which is actually not that much, that is not that hard for you to do. Like I actually, you know, unless it's something really, really serious in your life where I just don't think that it's too much for someone to acknowledge, and for the acknowledgement of something to burn them out. So yeah, and then for people of color, like I'm not sure if Shannon is or isn't, but for people of color who feel burnt out by actually, you know, just living it, like I mentioned, I think I'm gonna round it off by saying like the first and easiest way is just having a community, and even if that is one person, it's more valuable than you know.
Just add on,
please.
for the piece around, so if I'm hearing the question correctly, it's asking, how do we regenerate? Where do we find strength? That's a really tough one. So how I usually try to contextualize that question is Indigenous people, we are in our genocide. We are in our genocide. We fulfill all the criteria as laid out by the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And what that means on the ground is, and we hear them in statistics, we hear them in the ongoing statistics. So things around suicide, things around our health, you know, an overrepresentation of our families have diabetes, an overrepresentation of our families going to jail, an overrepresentation of the healthcare system, you know, all of these stats means somebody's passed away in this past month. And for myself, just grieving a young nephew a couple of weeks ago, you know, grieving with my sister of a murder of her extended sister. Sorry, sister means cousin. Sorry, I have to just like, my sister of my sister is my sister. You know, and all of these deaths are they're monthly, and it's very hard. It's very hard. So when I say to regenerate, you know, these are key important pieces. These are important things for us to carry on. They're life-giving. They're it was bell hooks around loving ethics, but I think there's another scholar who says, you know, self-care is, for a person of color, is a radical thing to do, is to breathe in and out every day, you know, practice that. I do that with our youth leadership conference. You know, it sounds really innocent, But really what I'm, my inside voice is saying, you need to stay alive. Like you need to stay, like breathe in and out. Like if you need to breathe in and out, let's do it together. We're going to practice. And I was like, now you have to do that until you're 100 years old. It's like, and it's harder than it sounds. But I find for me two things for sure is connections, you know, to continue those healthy connections, and to connect with folks that have gone before you. So the recent one I was coming across, I was asked a question to help with authentic text, authentic Indigenous text. And my question was like, to me, under for education, there's this idea of multiliteracy or multimodality, that is just not literacy as the written English word. That multimodality is around literacy of how you read things, right? So how do we read the parking lot? Oh, this is pre-COVID comment. It's like, how do we read the parking lot when it, you know, is a really busy season, right? How do we read the earth? You know, how do we read the plants? You know, how do we read these things? So there's definitely multiliteracy. So my idea was, you know, can we, as part of authentic text, can we follow Hawaiian sovereignty? They have this amazing song. It's not regenerative, but it's very counter narrative, and I think it's called, the English is the stone eating song. The stone eating song is so beautiful. It's so beautiful, but in it, it's talking about, you know, we choose a land, you know, you want money. And, you know, so it's talking about, you know, eating stones to the colonizers. And to regenerate, I was just listening to that song over and over again. You know, the pull-out canoe group, I was listening to the happy song. It's a stalo this is again pre-COVID. But I'm also listening to folks like Dr. Linda Smith. She's done many, you know, you could just Google her if it wasn't for her. And of course, she has her struggles at her university around racism. And I kind of took to social media to listen to her voice, to her and her husband's Dr. Graham Smith. You know, Dr. Grant, like I would play that video over again. Sorry, I think it was TRU, or not TRU, Kamloops. It was at their university. It was a beautiful talk that Dr. Graham Smith is like, he's asking, where are your calluses? And so he's talking about the intersection of theory into practice. It's like, okay, well, we can do this theory piece, but if you're not doing anything, you know, and so his question to the audience was like, where are your calluses? And it's, I found that very regenerative. Again, listening to the scholars that have gone in front of us, to listen to some of the uncles as well in real life, again, from a distance, social distancing from family has been really hard. You know, I want to go visit uncles and, you know, cousins, and we can't, right? So that was tough. One time I ran into somebody and my first instinct was like, I want to hug you. I was like, oh no, because I was like, I actually have to flee from you to keep you safe, right? So certainly finding those other spaces, alternative spaces to find one another, and even just talks like this, like again, listening to other folks. This is really filling my cup, asking these questions and filling these spaces. So thank you. Good question, by the way.
Thank you. I'm just thinking that as people are dropping off on the webinar, because it is a tough conversation to have for 2 hours, that we could, you know, just end off with some themes that I've heard each of you speak to. And, you know, going back to the theme of the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is youth. I know, like, so Shannon, you were asking Mauvey, she is a person of color, and she's one of those amazing students at UFE that is pushing the institution and asking the questions. And Aaron as well asked the question about what can we do to help you, right? And he's an ally, and I can say that as a RAN member, he's been an ally for very long. You know, I feel hopeful after this panel because a lot of these students have been facing so much harm within the institution, and they've started vocalizing that and pushing the institution like I've never seen before. I joke to Ian all the time saying that when I was an undergrad, I was like a meek little mouse. Like I had no capacity to think the way these students, and Peggy, you spoke to that, like the youth, oh my, they're beautiful. They are so beautiful. Like, and I feel that, and Ian and I feel that all the time talking about our youth. So, you know, I hope to all of the students, especially who are listening, I hope you have felt a little bit of hope in conversations about regenerating yourselves and finding yourselves in a community that is doing the same thing that you were wanting to do, and finding the hope. But I thought maybe if each of you could just end off with a message to the youth who are listening, and it could be UFE students, it could be youth in our community, maybe youth, Jasmine, who are, you know, protesting in the farm workers movement. Mauvey, it could be youth potential artists. Peggy could be potential students, teachers. Maybe they want to be Indigenous educators like you, and they see you and they're like, damn, this grandma is cool, man. Like, she's so amazing. Like, maybe that's a great way to end off, to say, can we speak to our youth? And what's your message to our young people? Is that okay if we just end off with that? Yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Mauvey, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we're all here to make the world a better place for those who are going to live in it in the future. That's literally the whole point of our work. And so one of the things that I'm doing is it's an initiative that I put together called the Night Skin Initiative. And so I guess it started, I'm developing and I'm changing a lot of things into it now to include just people of color, like period, which is actually a big change for the for what it is about. And it's essentially a grant system. And this year we have like an ambitious goal of trying to raise £1 million. And the whole point of this grant initiative is to award people of color, creative people of color, grants, financial support, and then mentorship and development in their actual craft, just to be able to take their dreams to viable, sustainable careers. So I think, you know, being someone who has been a recipient of actually a couple of the grants in the last year, being like over the moon, but then thinking how difficult it was to actually put myself in position to get those grants, and, you know, how many years of not getting grants. I think that it's important for people of color to actually create scenarios that that can help other people of color. So, for example, there's just not that many gatekeepers who are people of color. So it's important. This Night Skin Initiative, it's important to create those gatekeepers, those decision makers. So I'm currently working with about 30. I hope it's going to be about 50 by the end of April. People of color from around the world who are going to form like a committee, and we're going to be the people who decide who are going to be recipients of these awards. We're the people who are going out and fundraising and trying to earn as much money as possible. The more money we earn, the more money we can give away. So right now it's on www.mauvey, M-A-U-V-E-Y, mauvey.shop. And then you can read about the Night Skin Initiative. The text in there is going to change, so don't freak out. It's just to include more people. You can donate directly, or you can purchase an item from the store. And the store will increase with different options, and obviously you can donate as much as you want to. But I think that the message to young people is be creative. Continue being creative. Like this, the Night Skin Initiative is just one idea. Like the great thing is that you have among you are the people who are going to make who are going to create the future, which is actually such an exciting prospect. And so just like many before you. Continue being creative, and maybe some of the places that were pitfalls for people before you is, possibly people's lack of community, which I think with the young people today, we're already seeing more of that. We're already seeing more community. We're already seeing more groups and people banding together. So be inclusive, be protective of each other, and be creative.
Yeah, I can go.
Go ahead, yeah.
So when I was in my early 20s, I remember, as I was beginning that journey of activism, I would be told by people who are, a decade older that, one day I would stop being so angry about injustice. One day I would stop caring about, socialism and anti-capitalism and anti-racism and, Sikh sovereignty, and all those causes that I was learning about and, wrapping my head around and feeling super passionate about. And being on this side now in my late 20s, I can firmly say that they were wrong. I didn't suddenly stop caring because I got older. In fact, that care only deepened and solidified within me. So if you were in that place, in your undergrad or in that place of learning where that righteous and loving anger is bubbling up in you and it's reaching a boiling point, and you're being told that one day you're just not going to care anymore, so stop caring so much. Trust in your truth, and trust in the work that you are doing, and trust in the causes that you are fighting for, because they are valid and they will always be valid.
These are so great. I should be taking notes. Well, I'm thinking of three things for sure. Is gratitude, self-location or self-reflexivity, and bring your own paddle. So I'll just kind of, the gratitude piece, to express or to sit with gratitude is a key piece around longevity, because there's much to being in these margins and in a genocide. It's hard, but I found practicing and visualizing gratitude has really saved my life in many avenues, because I could spend lots of energy looking at the other and becoming enraged. And so gratitude, finding that gratitude, to express that gratitude, I think is important, to be thankful. I was just so thankful. I was actually getting excited for the stinging nettle plant. Because as a weaver, I've taken up a couple projects, and one I was like, I am so excited to see the stinging nettle plant. I can't even think about that, but that's being in relationship with the plants, but expressing my gratitude and hopefulness. The second thing is the excavation of self is so important I kind of, and I'm not really, it's not a fully formed idea, so I apologize if I stumble a little bit, but I found that every step that I took in finding out who I was and my obligations to my sovereign laws, my DECALF laws, and my position within that has been really my life work, right? All of those things stem from that. Your strength stem from that, um, and to carry on. Like I have never regretted that self excavation. You know, to have those conversations with the head of my clan, my Zoda, have always been fruitful, have always been life giving. Um, and, you know, connection to community. You know, it's really hard because I don't live within my community, I live far away. And every time I have those conversations have been life giving to make those. And that comes back to self excavating, or I don't know, to really find out who you are, you know, to find out who you are and your own, you know, heck no statements kind of stem from that. And lastly is comes from my paddle experience. Like I always think, I think it was 1994 when I first paddle was put into my hand, and I often talk about it as bring your own paddle. Bring your own paddle, because you know, that training, the training as a canoe puller, have been again life-giving. Um, but I find within all of the spaces that I have been given the opportunity to be in, is the 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 moments I regret are the moments where I don't go, hey, hold up, did you just say what I think you said? You know, I kind of you know, to be ready for that racism, to have strength within yourself, and to have your skills, you know, to really sharpen that saw or sharpen those uh, moose tanning hide tools, sharpen them up, because racism is very much a day-to-day thing, right? So I'm not saying the journey's easy whatsoever. It's been um, very difficult for in many different ways, and I would offer like to have that effort in your paddle. So as a canoe puller, we traveled to, one of the things that I feel many canoe pullers, we jump into outrigger canoe pulling, or sorry, outrigger racing. And my husband and I, we went to the Queen Lily Kualani Hawaiian race, and it's 2 hours and 45 minutes. I think it's like 35 miles, 35 kilometers. It's the world's longest canoe race. And we went in it. And I remember going to that canoe, and it takes money to get there to Hawaii. We got there, and I was feeling really self-conscious because we don't, you know, we're not a wealthy family. Um, and I was noticing the teams, they've got some really skookum matching uniforms, and they have the $400 paddle. And, you know, it was quite a bit of wealth we were looking at, as, you know, hundreds of teams were coming from all over the planet to this race. So there's people from Brazil, people from China, people from Australia, New Zealand, and it was quite an amazing thing. But I was feeling really self-conscious because I didn't have a $400 paddle. I had a homemade paddle made by Mr. Point here at Skokel, and I went to a wonderful information session with one of the elders. They called it Talk Story, and I was so. We went for a practice paddle, so I was all standing there soaking wet, and you know, with my wet shoes, and I was holding my paddle at the side of the hotel ballroom, listening to the elders from their community, the Hawaiian community. And he was getting upset with people And I was like, oh, watch out when the elders give you heck. But he was giving heck to the youth, to the young people, because he was saying, you know, all these people, they're getting these the large company endorsements, you know, and it's all about the money. It's about all of these things. And, you know, he was talking about when he was young, and, you know, they would just have the metal canteen of water, and they would paddle for hours and hours between islands. But he was talking about more. He goes, it's not about your paddle. It's not about your paddle. It's about the effort you put behind that paddle. It's the effort you put behind that paddle. It's not about my $400 paddle. And that moment just really kind of cut into my soul. And I've carried that story ever since then, because it's sort of, you know, bring your own paddle, but it doesn't have to be a fancy paddle, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, the $500. I don't know. I think they're up to $600. I'm looking really, trying not to want, but it's not about the expense of the paddle. It's not how it looks. It's not this. It's the effort. It's that effort behind the paddle that counts. So that's my third and last. Bring your own paddle. It's what I often say too. I do get invited into pre-service teachers. I know here at UFB a few times, and I've been talking to UBC pre-service teachers and SFU pre-service teachers. I've, you know, talked to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are going in for their BEd to keep going, don't give up, and bring your own paddle. So, thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Peggy. It's such a wonderful way to end this panel session. I just really want to extend my heartfelt thanks and warmth to you and to everyone on the panel as well, Jasmine and Mauvey, for contributing the way you have and giving of your time and your energies for this really important event. And just, you know, the ending with the thought about the paddle it's just so wonderful to think about. I hope you've been able to get out paddling in these times too, because of all the restrictions we've been facing. So yeah, very soon, hopefully. So I just wanted to again thank everyone who's been involved in this event. Thanks to my co-chair Sharn, who's put a lot of energy into organizing it, and to everyone who's sponsored this event and who's come to attend it. And we're very, very fortunate to have the speakers who came today to speak with us and to share their knowledge with us. And speaking of effort, my hand is covered in ink from writing so much, and I'm a little cramped up. So, but I just want to again extend thanks. And just a quick announcement about an event tomorrow. We continue to have a week of action this week, in this week where we're commemorating the International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, which is really something that needs to extend all year round, every day of the year. And that is tomorrow. There's an event that UFE RAN is co-sponsoring with the CHASI Hub here at UFE, as well as the South Asian Studies Institute. It's called Revealing Systemic Racism and Inequities in British Columbia. It's being also coordinated with the Office of the Human Rights Commissioner, the BC Office of the Human Rights Commissioner, featuring Kasarai Govinder, Trish Garner, along with First Nations Data Governance Initiative champion Gwen Phillips. And that'll be at 1 p.m. tomorrow. I believe similar to this event, there is a registration that you can find online. If you need information about this, you can email antiracism@ufe.ca, and we'll try to get back to you with information about how to register. So once again, really huge thanks, warm thanks to everyone who was able to come today, and to all the panelists for your time. And want to wish everyone well and good health and safety as we move forward and we keep on stepping.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.